Welcome, everyone, for this special bonus episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast, bringing in a conversation here that just cannot wait for our regular weekly episode release. I want to make sure I had this conversation as kind of a follow-up to a sort of a gathering as part of Ed Tech Week. So some conversations with other higher ed leaders around kind of what you all are doing, kind of interfacing with and doing, really amazing work. And I think it's telling that I've talked with you twice and a member of your team about just kind of how you all are really kind of uplifting, I think, great tools and platforms and perspectives on AI in higher ed and certainly, kind of what's happening in the classroom. So we'll make sure just kind of right here at the top, there'll be some anchoring, I think, through our conversation. You put out a really great blog post recently. So we'll put that in the episode description. Definitely encourage folks to check that out and all the other kind of resources that you all have at on your website there. But and since you've been on before, you've introduced yourself before too, we'll link out to that episode and the other episode with your colleague, Eric Wang. And then I just want to get into our conversation here because I think it's a lot around some misconceptions, purposes of like AI detector tools and some really, I think, just kind of tactical specific pieces. So that's part of why I just wanted to kind of have you on, kind of following up on that kind of gathering as part of Ed Tech Week, but then sort of uplifting what I feel like are really kind of, salient points for me as I'm talking with a lot of people as they're curious kind of what I'm hearing and seeing on this AI and higher ed topic. So to start us off, to not kind of preamble too long here, Annie, what are the biggest misconceptions educators hold about AI tools like generative writing assistants? Because I think that's probably a really common one, people using ChatGPT to help them, write something. The misconceptions about these tools in student work that you're kind of seeing.
Yeah, I would say that there's different parts of AI and the tools that they're using and the concerns that teachers have, right? Teachers have concerns around original thought. They also have concerns about students actually doing the work, and they have concerns about students developing the skills they need to be productive and successful. So there's kind of all of these different concerns that educators have with regards to AI generative writing. So I would think probably the biggest misconception is that we know what the right amount of use of AI is. Right. I think that you hear a lot or you read a lot around, that students need to learn AI literacy to be successful in their career, be successful in the workforce. And you're hearing AI literacy, AI fluency, pick your different word there. But I think that what we don't know is what that really means. Like what part of AI does the student need to learn? Does that just mean they know how to do really good prompts? And I would say that's probably what most people mean today, or really how to use AI to get the most out of guidance and research. I think people kind of mean that, but there's other pieces, which is if AI literacy is how AI models are created. How does a large language model work? And then by knowing that, how do you then use that data to validate maybe the data that you get back from an LLM, and how do you use that intentionally, and how do you question it so that you are, as a student, questioning the right things. There's also just AI and LLMs that are being embedded into everything around us. I think that right now it's like a bot or a writing open space that we're used to, and that's kind of the interface that people are accustomed to. That interface is going to change. We're already seeing it change. It's just embedded in how we do our work. And so what does that mean for AI literacy? So I think, number one is that we don't really know what AI literacy is going to look like or what it really means, other than that we're still very much at early days. I'd say the second thing is that people tend to ask around, is AI write in a very sophisticated way? So if someone's a good writer, does that mean that they're writing like AI? So some people think that is how large language models work. Yes, large language models are polished. They can make work slop, we're hearing that term now, sound really good. They have a level of fluency in terms of the sentence structure that they're using, the transitions they use, like that syntax is polished, but what they say under it isn't always polished. You have kind of the surface level to a lot of AI work. And People don't understand that it really is a next word predictor. I know you can go online and read about that, but that is really statistically how LLMs work, right? It takes the context of all words, all things that have been created and written. It also understands more about you and the subjects you tend to ask it. So it has that context. And whatever context you feed it as part of a prompt, or if you're using an application, the application may pre-prompt. I say like, hey, can you write this in a way that would make a high school teacher understand or would be at the high school level? Like you can have those pre-prompts. But then at the end of the day, it's trying to predict the most next probable word. And that is what creates a statistical signature, not how sophisticated the language is or how good of a writer somebody is. It really is the word choice that is the statistical significance that we look at when we're looking at something like AI detection.
Yeah, I think those are two big points. And I'm kind of like at least heartened a bit. It's refreshing, I guess, that there's so much around like AI literacy kind of right out of the gate versus like, I think with a lot of like the advent of like social media or something else, or, and the thing that I think is such an interesting parallel where it's just like it was such a different kind of context or dynamics is like Wikipedia, that idea of like, oh, it's this thing online, it's got all the answers you could ever want and you could look over it and find everything, whatever. And it was sort of just like this boogeyman. And I think, for a good period of time, people kind of just like, can't use it, do not use it, don't even think about using it. And it was just sort of walled off. That was the end of the discussion. Now we're kind of right out of the gate. Everything's kind of just moving quicker. So people are having the conversations of like, well, we need to build AI literacy. But it's like, what do you mean by that? And that is a conversation I've had several times over the past few weeks. But that idea of like trying to at least like figure out maybe your definition of it as an institutional leader or whatever else, as you're maybe building curriculum, because I think all these conversations are certainly like teaching with AI and about AI. So like, I think you were kind of getting at some of those points of like, there's certain times we need to get a little bit meta and be like, this is how this stuff actually works. So you can kind of like level set expectations and like, it can kind of be whatever you want it to be kind of thing. Like you said, it's like, it is just sort of like a next word predictor, depending on what you feed into it and depending on how long you've been using it and depending on like all these other things. So I think there's misconceptions where certainly people may just be kind of similarly like, wall it off, we're not going to use it, it has no place, like, there's no value in it, we can't, imagine a way that it would be sort of helpful, all those misconceptions. And I think you giving kind of some of the context as to why that is very helpful. And I think another piece of this is, AI detection, like the idea if, somebody is using it, but you likely want to know that, as a faculty member or whoever. What are the core purposes of an AI detector tool in this evolving classroom environment where like, it is that idea of like, we've got to acknowledge this isn't going anywhere. Students are going to use it. And maybe we can, try to guide them in best ways to do that. But, as we're seeing AI detector tools out there, what do you see as the core purposes of them in the classroom?
Number one is transparency. I think that we're at a place now where, as I started, there's a lot we don't know. There's just a lot we don't know in terms of how it can be used, how students should use it, what are productive uses, what are not productive uses. I always say, like, I don't think we know what responsible AI is, but we kind of know sometimes what it isn't, right? We can see when someone's using it, like, that's not a responsible use, but we're trying to understand the best ways for students to use it on a specific assignment or to continue to develop certain skills that they have based on those assignments. And the only way to make that happen is for teachers to see how students are using it. That's really the biggest issue right now, is that students go off and they do an assignment or they do research and they're on their own and they're using it, they're prompting it, and for very productive uses and for some non-productive uses. But it's not in transparency with the educator. And so from our perspective, that creates a conversation so the educator can understand how it's being used to then whether it's a productive use, so that they can say, hey, it seems like you might have used it. Did you use it? How did you use it? Did you brainstorm? Did you create an outline? How much did you change in that? Where did you get stuck and decide you needed additional help? It's really about the transparency so that we can figure out that next step, which is like, how much is too much? How do we get to the point of being able to answer that question? And the only way is know how it's being used. And it's not about, creating a punitive world for students, right? And it can be, though. I mean, if a teacher says absolutely no AI and a student goes and does that, that's a trust buster, right? And one thing that we continue to come back to is that trust between an educator and a student is really important. And that's why that transparency is also important. And what we hope is that with more tools for the teacher, that we can create better bridges between the two, that it's not this environment that seems right now is a little overheated, right? How do we bring down the temperature so that students and teachers can openly work with these tools in a way that is not taking away from the learning process?
Yeah, that's what I've really appreciated about your approach, is kind of looking at it as a very kind of just robust and kind of comprehensive sort of suite of tools, or kind of, just really acknowledging all the kind of factors that go into this. Because I think just from what you were saying, like, one, like, just sort of like the perspective I think that is helpful to maybe sort of just ground everything is like, it's always helpful when a faculty member can kind of be like, hey, show me your work, like show me how you got here and all that, like that fundamental kind of classic point of view, just adapting it for a new context. But that idea of like, if you're using an AI detection tool sort of in a vacuum, it might just flag like, oh, this student used AI, but it's like you have no idea of like the show me your work kind of process to get there. So it's like, cool, yes, like helpful to know, transparency, like, AI is sort of factored into the development of this assignment. But yeah, that the collaborative, transparent, more dynamic or kind of robust sort of approach, I think, is helpful because it doesn't rely on, I don't know, there having to be like several steps of like a back and forth of something and be like, hey, this assignment shows that you used AI. Can you tell me more about that? And that's like that could be an ideal and perfect scenario that works just as well, but it's like certainly less efficient. You could just sort of see it as part of kind of the submission or whatever else. I think it just being kind of seamless or sort of on demand. And so I think that is like a big factor here, is now that we have sort of the capabilities to, I think, get a fuller view of things, like how are faculty sort of harnessing that. And I think to tee up and kind of segue to my next question here, like, what does a good AI-informed institutional policy look like in your view? Because I think it could be that idea of like, well, it's allowed, but we just need to see, the process or whatever else. Like, what's kind of on your mind? Like, what would be your advice, I guess, for folks as they're kind of developing and evolving policies as it comes to AI usage?
It's funny. Every year I feel like I change my viewpoint on this a little bit as we learn more. And even going back to the detector, right? So detection came out just like 5 months after ChatGPT was released, mainly in response to teachers being like, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, it's easy for us now. We're like 3 years into it, which is crazy. I think I read an article. It's like we're 1,000 days in. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's like this. Someone's counting, first of all, which is shocking. But we're 1,000 days in. And early on, it was very confusing, right? And what was going to be the effect and how did it work? I think that's where the detection came in. And then, as you're right, as we move forward, what are the other data points that teachers need to evolve in this new world and to think about that? But early on, I remember when it first came out, I was like, institutions need to have a policy on this. And it's making it very difficult for teachers if institutions don't have a policy. And then I kind of came around to really understand more about how it was being used and the productive uses of it. And then I realized that, like, it's really an assignment level type of policy, right? Like, every assignment's going to be different, and we should let the teacher extend their own prerogative to how they want to teach. With that said, and so that was kind of my second go around. That's like phase 2. And phase 3 is like a combination, right? I think there has to be some overarching, and it could be that even a lot of existing policies, integrity policies, are broad enough that one could say AI fits into it. But I think that, depending, sometimes it's too broad and then it's not actionable. But at this core of it, it needs to be about transparency, that you're representing the work that you did, and that you're open about how you used AI. And I think that doesn't just apply to academia. I think that in general, as society, we're kind of getting to this point where we're like, do we want to know if an article was written by AI? Do we want to know if a song was done by AI? And I think that that's an interesting debate about it. But at the end of the day, especially in academia, where you're showing your development or you're showing your research, and that is the work that you're doing, you need to be able to tie that back to the sources that helped you. And that source could be an article, obviously, as it has been, or a book or other research, or that source is that you used AI. And I think that now it's important to be granular about telling how you use it, just to help the teacher understand, well, 5 of my students use it in this way, and I've really seen amazing outcomes from these students. That's probably something I should talk about and I should encourage, versus 5 students use AI, they said, in this way, and they just didn't have any creativity. Right. And so through that transparency, you're able to link the use to the outcome at the educator level, which is what I think we need.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a great perspective on this, is like have the overarching kind of institutional departmental something that kind of gives you like kind of an overarching guidance, and then empowering faculty members to think critically about kind of per assignment. You could give some sort of additional instructions and everything. Yeah, I think it is going to need to be that sort of flexible and kind of precise and sort of surgical here. And I think that's even just kind of implicit on, in your kind of regaling of your journey, like it just
Yeah.
is like this stuff needs to be constantly evolving just in general, but even in the sense of like, yeah, I think just there needs to be some fluidity in the way that we perceive AI usage, and that is sort of, it's like it's a good thing. Like it's a tailwind here. I get the idea that it's like, okay, it'll feel very intimidating if we needed to create like, the one policy to rule them all, and it's like very rigid, and it's, we're not going back to look at it and revise it, and, kind of locks people in. And I think also with what you're saying too, because I know what's coming up for a lot of people is cognitive offloading. Like
Yeah.
that is the worry, and kind of that is sort of also implicit in what you were saying, is like we want the policy, like the outcome is that it is a helpful assistant for for students to be able to still kind of put in their creativity, put in their perspective, show that they are learning, show that they understand the concepts that we're trying to teach them. And I think AI can be very effective with that, of just helping to maybe kind of synthesize or distill research. But then it's like, I'm still writing everything.
Yeah.
Like you're kind of like giving me this, giving me that, just so I can spend more time actually like weaving it together or whatever else. But then again, like each assignment can give the guidance as to like, okay, we've seen students be successful by using it this way.
Yes.
That is totally, in bounds, and just being clear about that. Cause yeah, like when things are ambiguous, you're gonna have some students who like don't use it at all because they're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't, I don't want to like tread too close to the line. Other students, yeah, like there's no creativity, the AI just writes everything for them and whatever else. And it's like, yeah, I think just being clear on the expectation and why, like I think I would hope, I guess, students and other like would be it'd be helpful for them to know, like, we're setting this expectation, this is why. And because I think, yeah, I could just sort of like, what are our desired outcomes for you by, doing this assignment this way?
So what kind of the thing that I'm seeing is that, and I don't think it's surprising at all, is that the most productive uses are not the actual writing. I mean, maybe the editing or like a polish or whatever, but like the most productive uses I've seen with students are around organizing and research. And I love seeing the creativity and the tools there. My daughter is doing this like research project, and she's collecting all this complicated research. And she's just a big fan of putting everything into Notebook LM to like help her distill it. Right. So like a lot of complicated things. Let me give you some high points of how you move forward with all this data that you've given me. I think that assessing and analyzing data also really good use, because we're human and we get tired. So I'm liking students using it for more things and thinking about that it's not just a writing tool. Like that was so immature in terms of our thinking and the tool itself. And it's nice to see students evolving from like, I'm just going to use this to write, but like, I'm going to use this as an assistant. And that's really where the power is. Now we got to figure out how to really turn those knobs.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping up here, I think, if you want to kind of distill down everything that you're speaking to, because I think, yeah, I think it's kind of the examples that you're providing of like the effective uses of AI as, as an assistant, to students as they're maybe kind of, distilling down research and certainly, I mean, we've not even touched the whole other episode, I think, of like how AI could help faculty, do their job better, like,
Totally. Yeah.
grading or whatever else. So like, there is like a lot here, but, we're doing this as kind of a quick hit bonus episode to kind of keep the conversation going. From, EdTech Week about roughly a month ago. EDUCAUSE was recently. Like, I think there's just a lot of good chatter happening over this past month that you're just, I think, really being at the forefront of that, with the blog posts that you wrote and everything else, and just appreciate you kind of making this time. But as we're finishing up here, what is your advice for instructors who are hesitant about using stuff like AI detectors or whatever else, but know that they can't ignore AI in the classroom? It's, kind of trying to thread that needle.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to people who are kind of hesitant?
In decision making, more information is always better than less, right? And so I think that as teachers are assessing and trying to learn about their students and how they're using or even their original thinking or assessing what they've learned, it's just a tool in a toolkit, right? Think of it as something that helps you identify where you might want to spend more time, right? That you could always think about it as an efficiency tool if you want, of like, hey, I need to dive in here more versus I don't. And that it's not this one and done of like, means the student did something nefarious. This means the student didn't. And thinking about it more nuanced than that, I think, is really important. And at the end of the day, right, those conversations you're going to have with the student to learn more about what they wrote, that's never a bad thing. Right? To understand kind of their thought process that went in, if for some reason that you suspect that maybe they relied too much on AI, I guarantee you that conversation is only going to improve the student's future as well as your own understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful point to end on, is that idea of, from the faculty perspective, like empowering your students to use it in a transparent way will help you to sort of like know, like, wow, everybody kind of got stuck up on a similar area, and try kind of was waving the flag to their AI assistant or whatever to get some help or whatever. And that's like helpful for you to maybe kind of pivot or kind of adjust your approach and everything. So I think it's a powerful point to end on, and hopefully a rallying and kind of motivating, inspiring message. We'll have ways to connect with you and Turnitin, and our previous episodes, our conversations there, the blog posts that we mentioned, all in the episode description. So lots of great opportunities to kind of further the learning of folks listening here and keep the conversation going. So really appreciate you, Annie, for the time here, all that you shared, all that you're doing to kind of keep driving this conversation forward. It's obviously just a very important one. So thank you so much.
And thank you. This is a great platform, and I appreciate that you put your time into EdTech, and the focus is we're all learning.